Hi crafters, it's Andrea from Prairie Sky Paper Crafts here with a tutorial today. I am going to show you how to do antiqued metal. All you need is 2 colors of embossing powder, Versamark ink pad, a heat gun, basic black cardstock and embossing folder, and some stays-on for the final project or product. A paintbrush, a soft bristle paintbrush would come in handy as well, and I'll show you in just one second. So I've already taken my basic black cardstock and ran it through my embossing machine with the tin tile embossing folder. Now I'm going to bring in my Versamark. I saved this one for techniques just like this where it could get a little inky, could get a little messy. And I've got protective paper because you are going to want to protect your work surface for this. Excuse me. So for step 1, you're just going to lightly take your Versamark pad and apply it to your paper. It really doesn't matter how you put it on, but you do want to have a bit of a light hand. The 2 colors of embossing powder that I'm going to be working with are silver and gold. So I'm going to start with the silver. I just keep it in this little Rubbermaid container. And I'm just going to apply to my cardstock. Now, usually you want to be careful and make sure that you don't get fingerprints in your Versamark, but really for this technique, it doesn't matter because it will be covered up. Okay, so I'm just going to pull my color in. You do want to have fairly generous coverage for your first coat, just because you want to hide most of the black. Now you'll see there's some spots that I've missed, which isn't a big deal. And because it's antiqued, it's not going to be perfect anyway. So personal preference, I like to take my embossing folder off of my work surface and snap the lid back down. This is the closest thing to glitter that's allowed in my craft room. Okay, now I'm going to bring in my heat tool and I'm going to warm it up. Now this is a little, it's not overly smelly, but there is an odor when you do it because it's melting. So you want to keep your heat tool moving as well, just so that you don't get one area hotter than others. And it does have plastic particles in it, so you want to make sure that you're not going to touch it right away. It only takes a couple of seconds to cool down, and you can see as you're applying the heat that it starts to melt. So you can see what areas still need a little dash of heat and what areas you can kind of back away from. You can also take your pick tool and just hold what you're working in place. Tweezers will work well too, but I always have my take your pick super close to me, so that's gonna work well. Okay. So I'm fairly content with how that works. Oops, I've got a command hook on the side of my desk that I just hang my tool on. Okay, so there's that part done. Now we're gonna bring our Versamark in again. And on the areas that maybe didn't get as much coverage, I'm gonna kind of focus a little bit more there. And for this one, I'm just gonna brush a little bit. And you just kind of wanna randomly put it on. And again, if you get the next color where you don't want it to be, all you need to do is take your paintbrush and give it a brush off. All right, so now I'm gonna bring in my gold embossing powder, and I'm gonna use exactly the same technique, if I can get my hand to work, as I did for the first one. So we're just gonna run and kind of tap off the excess. Let's see, it looks a little heavy here, so I'm just going to tap it off. A little heavy on the bottom, so I'm just going to tap some of that off a bit. So you do want to see some of the black through, but you don't want to see a whole ton. Okay, and then again, just heat. And then you can see the gold is changing color, and you can see a little bit of the silver poking through as well. And at this point, it starts to get a little stinky, but it's not too bad. You can also use some of the metallic paper as your base, but for me, it just made sense. I did a sample earlier with the Parisian Flourish, I believe it's called, with the metallic underneath. It's pretty, but I wanted a bit more of a antiqued look, so I went with more of the black. Okay, I think I need just a little bit more gold here, and maybe a bit up here. Oh, excuse me. Oh, embossing powder is making me sneeze. Okay, and then I'm just going to go and do a little tiny bit more coverage. You don't want to add too much because as it melts, it's going to cover some of that detail that your embossing folder put in. I'm just going to tap that off a bit, tap it off there a bit. And I don't want super harsh lines with this as well, because when things age in antique, it's not terribly linear. I love this embossing folder so much. I tried to convince my husband that we needed to do it as a backsplash for our kitchen. He wasn't terribly excited about that idea. I still think it's a fabulous idea. Ton of work though. Okay. Let's see, I think maybe a little bit more silver. And really with this technique, you can just keep playing with it until you're happy with the way it looks. I'm just going to add a teeny tiny bit more silver, and then we're going to do the final touch. Okay. Got my craft room window open today. It's a lovely day, and the crows are talking quite a bit to each other. Okay, I'm going to flatten that down. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to tap off a little bit of the excess. I've got some sharp lines there that I don't really love. When you're doing this as well, if you notice that your paper is starting to curl, the way to remedy that is just to give it a blast of heat from underneath. It will go to flatten out your paper. And also with each layer that you add, it does take just a tiny bit longer to cool because you've got more layers that need to be cooled down. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Okay, now the final step for this is to bring in one of the permanent inks. There's two permanent ink colors that Stampin' Up sells. The Stays On Saddle Brown and the Stays On Jet Black. And I think because I've got, actually, let's try them both. Okay, so for the Saddle Brown, you basically do the same technique that you did for the Versamark and just kind of gently give it a bit of a rub, and it'll add a little bit of texture, a little bit of color, and it'll pick up some of those details as well. I actually like that. And then I'm just going to give it, it does dry super fast, but I am just going to give it a bit of a blast with my heat gun just to make sure that it's dry before I put the black over top. And then you can also get reinkers for the Stays On so that if it does start to dry out, all you need to do is just give it a reink and you're good to go. Okay, now for this, I'm going to kind of do a little bit more focus maybe on the corners and on the edges. And just kind of give it a bit of a, oh well. I'll give it a bit of a burnish so that you can, okay, this does not want to stay in my hand today. And then you can add a little bit more pressure to one area, or just keep it fairly even, whatever your preference is really. Okay, so I am quite happy with the way that that looks. And again, you can just play with it until you're content with how it looks. And I'm just gonna bring in, I think Old Olive for this one. Okay, grab my paper trimmer. And I'm going to cut this at 4 1/4, sorry, by 5 1/2. And when I do my piece of basic black, I left it at 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, but since I'm using it for a matte or for a front piece, I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to look to see if there's an area that I don't particularly love, and that's the one that's going to get chopped off. Okay, and then I think this side looks a little bit darker. I'm going to chop that side off. And it's good too, if you didn't quite get coverage exactly how you want it or where you want it, you can just trim that area off as well. Okay, so I'm just going to flip it over. I'm going to bring in, you will get embossing powder on the back. Not a big deal. It will melt. And it doesn't impede the front at all. So because this does tend to curl a tiny little bit, I'm adding a little bit more adhesive, and I usually do when I've got a piece that has embossing on it, just so that it lays completely flat. I'm going to add this onto there and give it a bit of a push. Now, I didn't decide how I was going to finish this before I started the video. So I've got Christmas Means More is right on my work surface. So I'm going to use, which sentiment am I going to use? Maybe Christmas Means a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to bring this, I'm going to bring over my stamp block. And will this fit? Just. Okay, I'm going to bring in another piece of Old Olive here. And what color am I going to stamp it in? You know what? I'm going to use Versamark and some silver. So I'm going to stamp my sentiment. Oops. Craft a lunch. And then I'm going to bring my silver back in. I love heat embossing, and I don't use it very often. But now that I've started, I'll probably go crazy on it for a few days. Okay, and yeah, I like that. Put that up to the side. If you hear a crash, it's my paper cutter hitting the floor. Okay. Then I'm just going to go ahead and melt inches now. 2 3/4, maybe. Yep. All right. Do that and mesh ribbon, maybe. No. Maybe I'll bring in some other sheer red. Okay, and I'm gonna do something a little different with the ribbon, I think. Oops. My hand still won't let me tie bows very well, but I can do a zigzag. And then I'm just going to tuck this like that. Put a little bit more adhesive on the back. So I just zigzagged the ribbon. Oops. And then put the adhesive on top of that. And I think that's good. There we go. Make that one Love the Stampin' Up! Adhesive. It is so sticky. All right. So there's our antiqued metal card. A little bit of red for a little festive glow. Old olive, which is one of my favorite Christmas greens, and the antiqued metal background. If you have any questions or comments about the technique, comment below. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Prairie Sky Paper Crafts, and hit subscribe so you're notified every single time a brand new video is posted. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day.